motor racing, probably the most exciting and spectacular of action sports, though for excitement and spectacle there can often be a price to pay.
The big idea, at any rate, is to drive on whatever happens. There must surely be a huge prize for the winner, if indeed anybody completes the course. It certainly looks like a dead loss all round for owners, drivers and the insurance people. But no one gives up till his car's wrecked or blazing. In fact, some drivers even completed 83 laps before the race was stopped. There were many injuries, but nothing fatal.
Motor racing is practically as old as the invention of the car. But in those earliest days, no special racing tracks existed. Any organised events took place in the streets and public highways, usually, though not always, cleared of other traffic on race days, as here in France at the turn of the century. They were often city-to-city races, sometimes over long distances, such as Paris to Bordeaux, and there were frequently serious accidents and deaths. In Britain, racing on the public highway was against the law. There was only one way to overcome that problem: a specially constructed track on private land. So the world's first purpose-built enclosed racing circuit of international standing came into being in 1907, Brooklands.
There is no track in the world like Brooklands, although it was constructed as many as 28 years ago. And the Easter Bank Holiday Racing is a sure draw for every motorist, past, present or future, actual and potential. The crowds at Brooklands do not go to see spills and hazards, but for the spirit of the sport of motor racing, which Brooklands preserves in a characteristic way. The British Mountain Handicap was the race of the day and was distinguished by some very gallant driving on the part of Freddie Dixon in his Riley number 16. Dixon, who has been in 2 bad accidents during the last 12 months, came second in his heat and won the final. A very popular achievement.
The technical requirements for improved performance in car racing were greatly contributed to by the efforts of men like Malcolm Campbell and John Cobb during the 1930s in their attempts to set up world speed records year after year.
For years, Sir Malcolm Campbell has risked his life in the endeavour to keep the world's land speed record British, and a brief screen resume of 3 of his comparatively recent achievements is of particular interest in view of his latest triumph. Year after year, Sir Malcolm indefatigably takes his car Bluebird out to Daytona to improve on his own time for the measured mile, and year after year he does it. And now he has brought the record up to 276.816 miles an hour. But Sir Malcolm, the fastest man on earth, will not be content till he's done 300.
Bluebird's chances of setting a new record at Daytona are outlined by Sir Malcolm Campbell.
Ever since we returned from Daytona in March 1933, we've been busily engaged on rebuilding the Bluebird. And this gigantic task has only just been completed. I do think that we have at last got a really efficient streamlined body. Our tunnel tests told us that if we were able to prevent the air from flowing through the radiator whilst the car was travelling at maximum velocity, this would increase our speed by a further 15 miles an hour. And we've got a lever fitted beside the steering wheel here to enable the driver to shut that shutter, although whether he'll be able to do so, take his hand off the wheel when travelling at full speed, remains to be seen. As a matter of fact, we never change into top gear until we're doing just on 200. I do so hope that we shall be successful, because if we are, it will be, I think, a great tribute to British design, British workmanship and materials.
Here she comes, Bluebird, on her record run over Salt Lake, flashing past the aeroplane at 304 miles an hour. The tire is changed before the return run, and off on the guiding oil line goes the Bluebird again.
Naturally, I'm delighted to have reached our goal. I've tried on numerous occasions in the past, but never got there, and at last we have gained that mark.
Well, Dad, I'm mighty glad you reached the 300, but
Malcolm Campbell's son, Donald, seen here, was later to follow in his father's footsteps.
Real good time once you've been over here in the States, because everybody's been so awfully kind to you, haven't they?
they sure have.
After Malcolm Campbell's 300 miles per hour, John Cobb was pushing back the boundaries of speed still further.
Covered the course at over 385 miles an hour on the first run and was evidently going to raise the mark this time. But it's hot work, and the car has to take on more ice while being serviced between runs. On his second go, he did over 403, reaching the astounding speed of 415 at one stage. His average for the mile was 394.196. beating his own record by more than 25 miles an hour. His wife was the first to congratulate Britain's world land speed record breaker.
But Cobb by no means confined his activities to the beach stretches of the world. He was equally at home in competitive racing, as here at Brooklands.
The 500-mile race at Brooklands. Unusual excitement is added to the sensational contest by the appalling weather conditions as the racing cars tear around at breakneck speed through a sea of mud and water. High-speed wheel changing. Cobb, who is unable to hold his car on the treacherous track, decides to retire. Freddie Dixon, number 33, takes the lead and wins at the terrific speed of 104.8 miles an hour. Here he is, covered with glory and mud, amphibious hero of the 500-mile splash.
Women racing drivers equally distinguished themselves during the 1930s.
At a party at my house, a man suggested that women could not drive as well as men. I replied that, on the contrary, I could find 9 amateurs who could drive extremely well. The original idea has developed into a race, and I believe and hope there is a good prize. glad to have won in our little MG. It's been great fun. I think we've proved women can drive as well as men. What do you get out of yours? Well, we only did about 85, I think, to 87, something like that. But up at the top there, I saw a car turn completely round.
Oh, yes, that was me. We turned round about twice, but we finished eventually quite all right.
It's very bumpy, isn't it?
The Monaco Grand Prix, one of the great events of Continental racing. The hair-raising circuit round Monte Carlo harbour was already well established by the 1930s. '32 and '33 saw the great duels between Vasi and Nuvolari. Both years they switched the two front positions practically lap by lap. Nuvolari winning in 1932 and victory going to Vasi here in 1933.
Racing at Brooklands, that's one way of enjoying the Easter holiday. Large crowds, including Australians, over for the coronation are attracted to the famous track. And they get their biggest thrill during the big race of the day, the broadcast trophy. The drivers go round and round and come out here, at least Billy Cotton does.
Billy Cotton was Britain's foremost dance band leader, regularly seen taking part at Brooklands.
Number one obliges. Cobb wins at an average speed of 136.03 miles per hour for the 30 miles. The fastest race ever run on the track.
Within 2 more years, Brooklands' great career had come to a sudden and unexpected end.
Brooklands racetrack might well be described as a war casualty. A new blow has been struck at the hopes of racing enthusiasts. Vickers have bought Brooklands and the track will no longer be used for racing. A hangar blocks the course near the start, where once the cars roared away to thrill spectators and keep British racing prestige so high. This is the track itself, which was covered over with scrub and trees for camouflage, and there were canvas houses built on the banking to deceive the German Air Force. Naturally enough, racing enthusiasts don't take very kindly to the new order, and oh how sums up just one aspect, the motor industry's case.
The British public as a whole probably looks upon Brooklands as purely a racing track. The public probably doesn't realize that Brooklands is the only place where observed tests of a motor car at high speed can be carried out. For instance, it is possible to send the ordinary production model of any make of car you like to Brooklands and tell the driver to go on around the track for 1, 2, or 3 hours at sustained high speed without taking his foot off. All that is of immense importance to the car manufacturer. The only alternative to Brooklands is to carry out the tests on the public highway, which is obviously undesirable from the point of view of public safety.
In future, I suppose the focal point of British racing will be the road track at Donington, at present requisitioned by the War Office. No, I'm afraid there's no doubt about it. Brooklands has had it.
After the war, the BRM was Britain's great white hope.
The presence of Reg Parnell left and Peter Walker at Silverstone to drive the 2 BRMs in the British Grand Prix was a heartening event. It had been feared the cars wouldn't be ready. There was a field of 25, 90 laps to go, making a total distance of just under 260 miles. Speed? Well, that averages well over 90. BRMs, Parnell, number 6, were watched with keen satisfaction by Earl Howe and Raymond May. And there goes Walker, number 7. On their performance in this race, the BRM's future possibly defended. In spite of Burns, their drivers carried on magnificent. Number 2, driven by Fanjo, is one of the Alphas, and Alphas have a habit of winning, though not today. Victory was destined for Gonzalez, number 12, in a Ferrari, but we shall see that later. Meanwhile, a flash of work in the pits, where every second counts. Parnell comes in. I bet he needed that. He finished 5th, a very fine effort, and Walker 7th. But there goes Gonzalez in a terrific spurt to win the race at an average speed of 96.11 miles an hour. A triumph for the Argentinian who beat the Alphas.
Sadly, BRM's moments of triumph were only too short-lived.
Motor racing drew crowds to Silverstone, where stars of the track competed in the Grand Prix. 85 laps, making up a distance of nearly 250 miles. Terrific speed for lap after lap, the result being a runaway victory at an average of 90.92 for Alberto Ascari in a Ferrari, number 15. Clark Gable was one of the motor racing fans there. The Formula Libre trophy race was an affair of 103 miles, and the luckless BRMs were engaged in this event. Froilan Gonzalez drove one of them, number 7, and of course the father of the BRM project, Raymond Mays, was there, watching like a lynx. Ken Wharton, number 8, drove the other. In the 8th lap, Gonzalez, who'd had a minor crash, came into the pits and proceeded to tell Raymond Mays all about it and what he thought of things in general. As Gonzalez was the faster of the two drivers, Wharton was flagged in and an exchange was made. The ace from Buenos Aires was now at the wheel of number 8. But it was in vain, for the winner of the race was the Italian Taruffi, driving a thin-wall special Ferrari at an average speed of 93.07. Laurels for victory, which alas still eludes the BRM. Drivers race across the track to their cars, engines roar into life, and the Le Mans 24-hour race has begun. All the names were there, Jaguar, Mercedes, Ferrari and Maserati, all striving to win the coveted laurels. In a race of this caliber, there's no margin for error. The big cars were setting a pace never before seen at Le Mans, and the Mercedes were making full use of their air brakes. The tragic accident came early when number 20, Pierre Levet, in his Mercedes, collided with Macklin's Austin Healey. The Frenchman's car broke up and crashed into the crowd. Meanwhile, the race went on with Sterling Moss leading in another Mercedes. Into the night, on they went in the wake of their headlights at over 170 miles an hour. The remaining two Mercedes were withdrawn soon after 1 o'clock, and Mike Hawthorn's Jaguar took the lead. Ferraris and Maseratis were among many to break under the strain, but Jaguars were geared for victory. Heavy rain made driving even more hazardous, but Hawthorn held the pace. Britain was right at the front with Peter Collins' Aston Martin lying second and Johnny Clay's Jaguar third. That was the finishing order. A great triumph for Mike Hawthorn, number 6, who races in to take the checkered flag. This is the third time in 4 years the Jaguar has won, this time covering over 2,500 miles in 24 hours. A triumph indeed for Hawthorn and his co-driver, Ivor Bueb, and another feather in the cap for British Jaguars.
The famous Mille Miglia, the 1,000-mile classic car race in Italy, was a triumph for Sterling Moss, the British ace. Driving a 3-litre Mercedes from Brescia, down the coast, across to Rome and north again, he went like the wind all the way. There was several crashes, one of them fatal in this race, which is probably the world's toughest and most dangerous. But miles ahead, on his way to victory, Stirling Moss was breaking the record average speed for the event by nearly 10 miles an hour. And he finished over half an hour ahead of world champion Fangio. The first Briton to win this race, Moss had scored a supreme triumph. Monaco in the sunshine, and the smoke of 16 racing cars ripping into their Grand Prix helter-skelter around the houses. The Mille Miglia has underlined the dangers of motor racing, so everybody kept pretty clear of the course. Just as well, for there was a nasty pile-up involving Moss's Van Wall and the Ferraris of Collins and Hawthorn. No one was hurt, but it put our three aces out of the pack. Leaving Fangio in a Maserati number 32 to take the honours. Tony Brooks in a British Van Wall number 20 drove magnificently to second place behind the world champion. After averaging nearly 65 round the treacherous hairpins, Fangio certainly deserved that trophy from Princess Grace.
The death of Mike Hawthorn in a road accident is tragic news indeed. It's all the more poignant because this most popular and famous of racing drivers had only recently announced his retirement from the sport. In 8 years of driving on the racetracks, he had reached the top, just beating Stirling Moss for the World Championship last year, and he was the first Briton ever to win that title. He drove with brilliant success for Ferrari, Van Wall and BRM teams in many parts of the world. Having won the championship, he decided to devote his time to his business. Now, at the age of only 29, his death is deeply mourned by thousands of friends and admirers in many lands. Mike Hawthorn, who won prestige for his country, will long be remembered as a great sportsman.
Stirling Moss, a star at Silverstone, driving a Lotus Innis Island. A BRM and Tony Brooks. In a Cooper, John Surtees, and the new Ferguson car was there. With an offset climax engine mounted forward, special suspension and a four-wheel drive, it's a racetrack test bed for new motoring ideas. Due to start the big race, Juan Fangio looked over the Ferguson, which Jack Fairman was driving. The British Empire Trophy race, 52 laps, 150 miles. Moss in front. Tony Brooks, 11. The Ferguson had gearbox trouble after 2 laps. 2 is Bruce McLaren, a Cooper. 1, Jack Brabham, another Cooper. 12, Graham Hill, BRM, finished 3rd. Surtees, 22, took 2nd place, but the real triumph was that of Stirling Moss. Driving all the way with his clutch out of use, he won easily at an average of over 104. What a driver! It's the Italian Grand Prix in progress at Monza. In the first lap of this grueling 267-mile race, all went well. Then in the second lap, approaching the curve on the inner section of the road circuit, it happened. Von Tripp's Ferrari, after touching Clark's Lotus, had crashed through a fence and rebounded. Wolfgang von Trips lay dead, and death came to 13 spectators. The fact that von Trips was within reach of the world title makes the tragedy more poignant still. So motor racing loses one of its brightest stars. This was to be Stirling's last race, Goodwood, Easter Monday, 1962. Number 7, so often his lucky 7, careered off the track. Stirling received the severe injuries which were to end his days as a racing driver. He began in 1948. By 1953, he'd become well established. He'd miraculously escaped from a crash before this race at Silverstone in the same year. Taking part also his great friend and rival Mike Hawthorn, who eventually won. Remember Moss's legendary drive to victory in the 1954 Mille Miglia? He won by half an hour from Fangio. Was he a greater driver than Fangio? Some experts think so. He certainly beat him at Monaco in 1956. In speed trials at Bonneville Salt Flats, he broke 5 records. In 1958, he was awarded the Seagrave Trophy.
The names of Malcolm Campbell, George Easton, Goldie Gardner, and John Cobb. We had another famous driver, Mr. Sterling Moss.
There's recognition indeed. Ever mindful of the campaign for safer driving, Moss was one of the first to take the advanced driving tests. He's driven in over 460 races. He won 3 successive sports car events at the famous Nürburgring. He never won the World Championship, but he was 5 times runner-up. In every event, Moss's style and dash captured the imagination of enthusiasts. On behalf of them all, we salute a great driver.
Monaco, and the second Grand Prix of this year's Championship Series. Two and a half hours round the twisting, tortuous course, the race of 1,000 gear changes. Graham Hill in his BRM number 3 takes an early lead, but then he spins to avoid another car. His teammate and rising star Jackie Stewart takes over. Bandini number 17 and Surtees in their Ferraris close behind. The notice says no speed, no noise. Very apt for the Monte Carlo race. Ferraris versus BRM, and Hill slowly recovering lost time. Jack Brabham nipped into the lead for a while till engine failure nipped him in the bud. 1 lap from the end, Surtees' Ferrari runs out of juice. He pushes it over the line to finish 4th. Meanwhile, Hill has worked his way back to the lead again, and he beats Bandini to win. The fruits of victory from Princess Grace. Victory at a record average speed for Graham Hill, the first driver ever to win the race 3 years running. Jim Clark describes Germany's Nürburgring, scene of the recent Grand Prix, as the classic circuit unequaled anywhere in the world. But Jim's always suffered from a German jinx. He never won at Nürburgring until now. This tremendous win in his Lotus Climax, number 1, is a twofold triumph. He's beaten the jinx and clinched the world title. Jim has won every world title race he's entered this year, 6 of them in fact. He's the first Briton ever to win the Drivers' Championship more than once. Well done, Jim. Well done, Lotus Climax, the invincible team of world motor racing. Now, a Movietone newsreel exclusive from Indianapolis. Jim Clark, the first British driver ever to win this American Classic. He not only beat the field, his Lotus Ford set a new record for the race. This tremendous boost to British prestige carries with it well over £75,000 in prize money. The European Grand Prix at Francorchamps, with 20 of Europe's top drivers competing for points in the World Championship table. Pouring rain kept speeds down, but still the cars were lapping at more than 120. Just back from his fantastic win at Indianapolis, Jim Clark, number 17. Hot on his heels, Jackie Stewart, number 8. Reigning champion John Surtees in the pits when his Ferrari broke down. Clark's best lap speed was 125 miles an hour. He beat Stewart into second place.
Clark, the first man ever to win the European Grand Prix 4 times running, now leads for this year's championship.
For a brief while in 1967, Brooklands popped back into the limelight once more.
Way back in 1907, it cost $250,000, the first motor racing circuit ever built. But since it was requisitioned in 1939, what remains of the track has decayed into a weed-covered ruin of its former glory. But to judge from the crowds and the old cars at the 60th anniversary, Brooklands lives on in memory, if not in the racing calendar. 10 years ago, a memorial was unveiled in tribute to the sportsmen and women who made the history of the first 3 decades of motor racing. We can bring back the past through film from Movietone's archives, when Brooklands was vibrant with rasping exhausts and thrilling spectacle. Kay Don in a Bugatti in the 500-mile race in 1933. Men can't be reborn, but machinery can. Today, many of the great cars of the Brooklands days are still lovingly preserved. A link with other great names: Harry Thomas, Malcolm Campbell, Henry Seagrave, John Cobb. During the 30s, John Cobb used to race this giant Napier Railton at speeds higher than the winner of today's Indianapolis. Now owned by Sir Patrick Lindsay, in its heyday it collected over 40 world records. At the wheel of this same car in 1934, John Cobb himself. This car holds for all time the Brooklands lap record of over 143 miles an hour.
Although it will still be used for testing and development, there'll be no more motor racing at Goodwood, one of Britain's 3 major circuits. Sad news for drivers and fans, many of whom will remember the Duke and Duchess of Richmond and Gordon opening the 2.5-mile circuit in 1948. Reason for the closure? The track is unsafe for the new Grand Prix formula and the big sports cars, so much faster than the machines of 18 years ago. Since that first event, a victory for Reg Parnell, Goodwood has known all the great names. Remember how Gonzalez, Parnell and Ken Wharton drove the BRMs back into favour in 1952. Vindicating the faith of Raymond Mays, Gonzalez led them to victory, first, second and third. Also in 1952, the first major win for a dazzling young driver, Mike Hawthorn. By 1953, he was beating men like the great Fangio, who nearly came to grief in the Goodwood Trophy. Hawthorn drives to victory in the Thin Wall Special. Goodwood became famous for its 9-hour sports car events. Sterling Moss drove in almost every major meeting until that tragic day in 1962. The injuries he received in his 100-mile-an-hour crash forced him to give up racing at the climax of his career. Two years before, motorcycling star John Surtees tried his hand at 4 wheels for the first time at Goodwood. He came second in a Formula Junior event. 4 years later, he took the world title. The careers of Graham Hill, another world title holder, has always been closely tied up with Goodwood. That was his TT win in '63. The closing of Goodwood marks the end of an era and leaves only 2 top-class tracks for international motor racing in this country.
Near Andover in Hampshire, Britain's latest racing circuit. We went down to join some enthusiasts for a few practice laps. Almost 2.5 miles long, Thruxton aims to be one of the safest circuits in the country. Wire fences, ditches and banks with reassuring barriers to prevent spectators becoming involved in the spectacle. A succession of fast bends and curves round a roughly oval layout,
Thruxton will allow for averages well over 100. There's also one rather nasty twist, obviously thought up by some very kinky member of BARC's design team. They'll be racing at Thruxton on Easter Monday.
As Australia's Jack Brabham receives the gold medallion, the seal of success is placed upon the world-famous racing driver's latest venture. To an impressive list of racing wins, Brabham has added the manufacturers' and drivers' titles. Behind the latest award lies the name of an Australian auto engineering firm linked with his to form Repco Brabham. At the engineering works in Richmond, Victoria, the latest Repco Brabham motor, the Type 620, is in production. The block is a standard V8 casting machined down to racing specifications. Here, the face of the block is shaved down, raising the compression ratio to a potent 11:1. When operating at the designed maximum of 8,500 revs, there's a lot of gas flowing through those valves, and they just have to be big. All models incorporate a fuel injection system, further increasing power output and reliability. Although a few standard components are incorporated in the motor, the design is entirely Australian, being the work of Repco's own design team. The motor has been described as a mechanic's dream. Adjustments such as this one to the timing chain can be made quickly and simply. Access to all parts of the engine is particularly simple, and the whole unit has been designed to allow speedy replacement of major components in the event of a breakdown during a race. If this were a piece of modern sculpture, it might be titled Octopus in Dreamland, but this is one case where a dream has turned to reality. As each engine comes off the assembly line, it's placed on the test bench and really put through its paces. Designed to replace the popular Coventry Climax motor, the 620 is fast gaining popularity on the Australian racing scene and knocking up an impressive score of victories on the overseas circuit, thanks to the efforts of the Repco Brabham racing team. Unfortunately for the Sunday driver, the new motor is not a good proposition for the family sedan. For a start, its basic cost of $7,500 probably puts it a little outside the average budget. Then again, in the middle of a traffic jam, who needs 300 horsepower sitting under the bonnet? Not unless you really want to try getting away from the lights like this. And they're racing. All those hours on the test bench take a new meaning now. It's Jack Brabham in car 5 dragging the last ounce of power from his all-Australian Repco Brabham Special. It's Brabham the winner, and as a culmination of a story of skill, daring, and enterprise, the laurel wreath of the victor.
First time in Britain, the controversial aerofoil spoilers to improve road holding. Driving for Ferraris, two of the youngest Grand Prix drivers, Jackie Ickx and Chris Amon. For the McLaren Ford team, Bruce himself and his fellow New Zealander world champion Denny Howe. Dan Gurney's Anglo-American Eagle. Only one Honda, but what a driver. Driving Lotus Fords, former world champion Graham Hill and a new recruit, Jackie Oliver. Brand new and never raced, the Lotus Ford 49B of Joe Sifford. The car's entered by Rob Walker, who used to back Sterling Moss. A few spots of drizzle before the start. Rodriguez changes to rain tires. A bad decision, it turned out dry. Jean-Pierre Beltoise and the French Works Matra. and Gurney's Eagle a bit slow to take wing. 80 laps to go, 212 miles, lap record over 104. In the lead, Graham Hill's Lotus Ford, number 8, and teammate Jackie Oliver, 9, but both would have break down. The bigger aerofoils can exert a pressure of 400 pounds on the rear wheels. Joe Siffert's car, number 22, has a smaller one, but it kept his boots firmly on the ground as he took over the lead. Then the race became a tremendous duel between Chris Eamon's Ferrari, number 5, and Siffert's Lotus. Eamon battling to get past. But the Swiss driver holds him off and breaks the lap record to win by only 7 seconds. Joe Siffert's victory gives Lotus 4 wins out of 7 major events. At Crystal Palace, the Daily Mirror sponsors something different in the way of race meetings. Included in an impressive lineup were many of the really great names among historic sports and racing cars. To be entered, cars had to be front-engined, and one event was for cars more than 30 years old. Their engines roaring in challenge, the old cars were at the grid for the start of the first event, a 10-lap handicap race. There goes a 1930 Riley's Special. In the event, a 1933 MG held the lead and won the race. The MG driver, McLennan, took the trophy and a ceremonial drink of bubbly. Leo Villa was there to share in the round. In another event, this 1936 two-liter ERA came in first. Leo Villa presented driver Martin Morris with the Garland. At Brands Hatch, a victory drive by Jackie Stewart preceded the world champion victory race held in his honor. Among those taking part were Graham Hill and BRM team leader Joe Siffert. Peter Gethin took the lead at the start. He was followed by Emerson Fittipaldi in a Lotus. Jackie Stewart was well back in 3rd place. On the 5th lap, Fittipaldi set up a new record for the full Brands Hatch circuit, averaging 113.5 miles an hour. But in the 14th lap, disaster struck. Joe Siffert had been fighting to take over 3rd position from Jackie Stewart, but his car crashed at Hawthorn Bend and burst into flames. He died from suffocation. The race was immediately abandoned. First prize was awarded to Peter Gethin, Siffert's teammate. Joe Siffert's racing career was marked by international success. The death of this great racing driver is a tragic loss for Britain and the motor racing world.
The STP Daily Mail Race of Champions almost ready to start. New Zealander Denny Hong. Wearing protective fire-resistant clothing, Peter Gethin. Driver of the STP March, Ronnie Peterson. From Brazil, Emerson Fittipaldi in a Lotus. And they're away. Held at Brands Hatch in Kent, there are £5 million invested in these cars. The 25-year-old Brazilian, Fittipaldi, is in the lead. The Race of Champions is considered by many to be a dress rehearsal for World Grand Prix fixtures. In the pit, Mrs. Fittipaldi times her husband as he sweeps past. On the heels of the Brazilian, Mike Hawthorn in a Surtees Ford. And so, after 40 laps, Emerson Fittipaldi wins the Daily Mail Race of Champions at Brands Hatch. For the lad from down South America way, a kiss from Mrs. Vere Armsworth, wife of the chairman of Associated Newspapers. The winner, Fittipaldi, is now all set to take on the giants in the European Championship Series. Old racing cars race again in the JCB Historic Car Race at Silverstone for the 1973 Historic Car Championship. For the young, it's a vintage car race. For older enthusiasts, an exercise in nostalgia, recalling famous cars and drivers of the past. Earl Howe briefs his drivers before the Grand Prix at Silverstone in 1948. That's when the wartime bomber training airfield became one of only 2 official motor racing circuits in the British Isles. And they're off. And the commentator of 25 years ago takes over.
The race was run over the flat airfield circuit. 65 laps of about 3.7 miles each, a total of just on 250 miles, and speeds up to 115 miles an hour were attained. High speed on the course was matched by snappy work and great excitement in the pits, but there was a bigger thrill in store. Ansel, driving an ERA, number 22, was fairly stepping on it, but he made a miscalculation at Maggott's Corner, one of the many sharp turns, and there he goes. Eventually, Villaresi won by 14 seconds from Ascari at an average speed of 72.28, and that's surely worth a wreath of laurels.
It's a point of interest that the speeds in those far-off days were only 15 miles per hour slower than those achieved by the record holders of today. Then, as now, motor racing was dangerous. Mechanics working feverishly in the paddock at Silverstone before the John Player Grand Prix 1973. Graham Hill's Embassy Shadow Ford making its British debut. John Player specials of Ronnie Peterson and Emerson Fittipaldi. Denny Hulme, Team Yardley McLaren. Peter Revson driving his Yardley McLaren Ford out of the paddock. Jody Scheckter, also Yardley McLaren, number 30. Nicky Lauder in a Marlboro BRM. Jackie Stewart and Tyrrell Ford, number 5. A final word between the reigning champion and his mechanics. Ronnie Peterson in number 2. Jackie Stewart, number 5. Francois Sever. Scheckter in number 30, followed by Revson and Hulme. And it's a push-off for Jackie Stewart. Graham Hill. And Fittipaldi. And they're off. Racing towards Cops Corner, Jackie Stewart is already in the lead with Peterson and Carlos Reutemann in number 10 close behind. Beckett's Corner is the tightest corner on the track, and there's always a danger of oversteering and careering off the track onto the grass on the outside. Club Corner, and Stewart still in the lead, followed by number 2, Peterson, and number 10, Reutemann. On the second lap, and Stewart has established a clear 300-yard lead, still being chased by Peterson and Reutemann. But there's trouble in the rear. At 160 miles per hour plus, Jody Scheckter in number 30 takes Woodcote wide, slews across the grass into the safety barrier, and ricochets back onto the track into the path of other cars racing into him at more than 150 miles per hour. In split seconds, there's one almighty pileup as car after car crashes into the wreckage. Marshals flag down other cars still speeding unawares around Woodcote towards the danger zone. The remains of Schechter's Yardley McLaren. It's like a battlefield. Old-timers say nothing like this has ever happened before in the history of Grand Prix racing. All three of the Brooklands Surtees team are a write-off, and John Surtees wonders whether he can ever start up again. And Andrea de Adamich is trapped in his Brabham Ford. The British Grand Prix starts for the second time, 9 cars short out of the original 28, and this time it's Ronnie Peterson in number 2 in the lead as they race round Copse Corner. Beckett's Corner with Peterson holding on to the lead. Peterson, Nicky Lauder in a Marlboro BRM and Jackie Stewart. Copse Corner, second lap, no change. But at Beckett's Corner, Stewart is lying second. With Nicky Lauder close behind, followed by Emerson Fittipaldi. Peterson, Stewart, Lauder, Fittipaldi, Denny Hulme and Peter Revson. But on the 6th lap, Stewart drops back to 13th place after spinning at Stowe, trying to overtake Peterson. Graham Hill's new Embassy Shadow rounding Beckett. So far, no challenge to the leaders. And next time round at Beckett's, Graham's in trouble, and it looks like he's out of the race. On lap 37, Fittipaldi loses drive to his rear wheels. Francois Sever, number 6. Lap 52, Revson in the lead. But then Hulme in number 7 overtakes Hunt in 27. And it's Revson racing towards the finish with Peterson second and Hulme third. Revson, Peterson, Hulme and James Hunt in a Hesketh March forward. American Peter Revson wins the British Grand Prix 1973 in a Yardley McLaren Ford. Brands Hatch, Britain's Grand Prix motor racing circuit. There's a touch of carnival when 10,000 fans turn out to pay tribute to their hero, World Drivers' Champion James Hunt. Nicky Lauder, the courageous little Austrian who was squeezed out of the honours. 6 months ago, Hunt, you could say, wasn't in the hunt for World Championship laurels, trailing Lauder by an impossible points margin until a terrible accident at Nürburgring put the Austrian temporarily out of action. Then began Hunt's dramatic climb up the points table until the Japanese Grand Prix gave him sufficient points to snatch the Drivers' World Championship. To put the new Marlboro McLaren M26 through its paces, the champion adjusts helmet and fire mask. This is the car he hopes that will bring him the double next season. Racing cars now are almost tailor-made. To get in, first remove the wheel. It's been a great personal triumph for the 29-year-old Briton. In honor of the occasion, a special golden helmet.
To end with, something a little different. Hill climbing. Speed hill climbing at Wiscombe Park, Devon.
Here to open the hill event is Sterling Moss, Aston Martin's #1 driver in the 50s, reunited with the car he drove at Le Mans 23 years ago. A 1954 2000 922cc DB3S, whatever that means. Sterling's still popular with the fans. The new Aston Martin is a picture of concealed power. Sterling Sealyham agrees. This is a rare chance for power car fans to see the best there are. Clive Cottam in a DB4 and a McLaren. This isn't a race, though speed is the object. Speed and performance. Michael McDowell in a Ralt RT1. David Way's Ensign. a Modus M4 driven by Ken McMaster. Martin Griffith's March 74P finishes the course. It's been a marvellous day for sports car buffs. If they've come to admire, well, they've come to envy a little too.